Welcome ladies and gents, Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. ERIK Robles has beaten Lee McGREGOR for the vacant IBO super bantamweight title in Edinburgh. It was a unanimous decision victory that Robles took on all three of the judges' scorecards. A very exciting phone booth type of fight. And it started off with people now saying, again, repeating the fact that you can't put in a Brit with a Mexican. Okay, the commentator even mentioned the claim that Mickey Duff once said that you should never fight a Mexican unless you have to, and the idea that they're Brit bashers and there's absolutely nothing a Brit can do, so he needs to stay away from Mexicans. The truth is that a pattern has emerged, not so much that Mexicans will always beat Brits, but that unheralded Mexicans seem to be getting results when they're not expected to against British fighters. But that's not to say that that always happens. I mean, I want you to consider something because I want us to get technical and tactical and talk about why these patterns have emerged. Mauricio Lara against Lee Wood. Wood won that second fight at a canter. Josh Taylor against Ramirez and Vasquez. Sonny Edwards against Guarneros and Gallardo. Maxi Hughes against Giovanni Strafon. Anthony Joshua in the rematch against Andy Ruiz. Amir Khan against Molina, Diaz, Barrera. Brook against Robles. Selby against Ramirez. And Frampton beat 5 Mexicans. The one win over Leo Santa Cruz, as well as Gonzalez, Garcia, Cazares and Girales. So, what is it about those fights that led to victories for the British fighter? And why is it that other Mexican fighters can sometimes really overcome a British fighter even though he's not expected to at times? In order to find the answer to that, like I said, we've got to get technical and we're going to have to really analyze this. So pause the video, go make yourself a cup of coffee because we're going to be here a while. But the point is that when you are preparing for the creation of a fighter, the aim that you have as a trainer shapes that from early in their career. So for example, let's talk about the Cubans. Because it's a communist country, the concept of individualism, the idea that a man is going to seek to be successful in life, to pursue his own happiness, to try and emancipate himself and his family, that doesn't exist. You're under the thumb. You're not allowed to be that way. Everything is about how to pursue what is good for the collective. It is the state and the party that matters. So as a result, when a Cuban fighter is being trained to become a top-class boxer, the concept is not about how can I make this guy who's not allowed to go and become a pro fighter become the best he can be for himself. The concept is how can he contribute to the society? And that is via gold medals. That is how you put Cuba on a pedestal. You go and win an Olympic gold medal. And so as a result, the way they're trained is to be light on their feet, an awful lot of movement. They don't have to necessarily sit on the shots because traditionally speaking, when it comes to the amateur game, you haven't got long 12 rounds, so you can exert an awful lot of exaggerated movement early on without worrying about gassing down the stretch. And you pick and poke and land little shots where they don't have to be big shots, just enough to keep a guy off balance, to offset him. Because like I said, however much he invests in the first 2-3 rounds, he's not going to have the time to come back and break you down necessarily. So you've created a system which is designed to pursue the excellence for the nation. Then on the other hand, you've got Mexico, for argument's sake. The Mexicans don't really have a strong system when it comes to the amateur scene, or certainly not as strong as Cuba, USA, traditionally the USSR. So instead, what they were seeking to do is emancipate themselves. They do live in a capitalist nation. There are some very poverty-stricken areas in Mexico. If you're able to literally fight yourself out of these difficult environments, you can achieve riches. You can travel the world. You can get yourself out of the difficult situation that you're in and literally with your fists fight your way to a better life. And as a result of that, the way a Mexican fighter is shaped from early in his career is how to be the most destructive guy possible. How can I break another man down and to literally will myself to achieve something special? Fantastic in the body, to the body. Often they're very, very good counter punchers because again, it's all about being in the pocket and being able to bust the opponent up, outland him, being sneaky with your defense in the pocket, knowing how to slip a shot, block a shot, deflect a shot, and then you land those powerful shots of your own. If you're not a big individual power puncher, you go with volume, but your ultimate goal is to wear the other guy down. In addition to that, pressure is a massive part of that. You're seeking to burst pipes. And so what happens with that is that the tempo becomes incessant. But apart from it being incessant and you having to work your way and grind your way through those Mexican tough gyms where you become a very hardened man, Because you're seeking to apply pressure, you can sometimes make certain technical errors. You'll often see Mexican fighters cross their feet, square on, do certain things whereby a trainer will look at it and say, you shouldn't really do that. Navarrete, for instance, he'll throw an uppercut and he'll bring his hand from off the floor. Mauricio Lara, how technically incorrect are his punches? Ultimately, he's saying, even if you get your shot off first, my shot's going to be bigger than yours. And if you are landing on me more consistently and more flush early on, I'm battle hardened. They've burned me in a furnace. I am ready as a steel soldier here, ready to keep banging away until I break you down. You cannot maintain the tempo that I can. So we're going to turn this into a firefight. And I'm going to be in that pocket and you're not going to outlast me. That is, by and large, the Mexican mentality. There are always going to be individual differences. I understand there are going to be some Mexicans out there who are a little bit different stylistically to other Mexicans. And the same will apply with Cubans, right? Dorticos is not a typical Cuban fighter, for argument's sake. But we're talking about generalized patterns here because we are, after all, talking about results, and results are patterns. Whereas when we look at a British fighter now, let's go back to a British fighter. A lot of the excellence of British fighters, because they didn't always have a reputation internationally, British fighters, a lot of it has come through the success of Team GB. And that has to do, of course, with amateur boxing. It's about being technically astute, technically correct, putting your shots together well from an amateur base. And then, because there's an awful lot of money to be made, after all, Britain has one of the biggest fan bases in boxing, there's a transition to the pro game. And so there's an emphasis on a lot of technique and developing yourself properly. And then from there, adding other wrinkles to your game, being more destructive and so on and so forth. So why is it that a lot of British fighters will come unstuck against seemingly unheralded Mexican fighters? How does that marriage marry up? Now, the focus on this discussion is to talk about the technical and the tactical, and we're going to go deeper into that. But it would be remiss of us as critical thinkers and analysts here not to try and be intellectual enough to consider the statistical as well. And the fact of the matter is, firstly, Mexico is a significantly bigger country than the United Kingdom. 70 million in the UK, 130 million in Mexico. There's an additional 11 million Mexican-born Americans and an additional 38 million on top of that Americans of Mexican ancestry. So there's a big difference in talent pool, in the source pool of talent where you seek to pick out your fighters. Now, the reason I'm also talking about Mexican Americans will become evident later on because we're talking about boxing culture, not ethnicity per se, and we'll discuss that later on. But in addition to having a bigger source pool, they're funneled into the lower weight categories because the average Mexican fighter tends to be smaller than the average British fighter. Just as people, on average, they're smaller people. And if you look at the presence of Brits where they're strong, you will find a strong presence at super middleweight, light heavyweight, cruiserweight, heavyweight, whereas the Mexicans are in the lighter weight categories. So what you're seeing is a funneling of talent in that lower end of the weight categories. It's the same reason that the Japanese are elite at the lighter weight categories, and yet at the bigger weight categories you don't really see any top class Japanese heavyweights or Japanese cruiserweights. It's just to do with the average size of the people there and the source pool of talent there. In addition to that, when you're trying to find patterns, you almost cut out the outliers because they can skew the results. In other words, Canelo Alvarez is such an elite level fighter that the reason he beats a lot of Brits is not because of a stylistic issue or technical issue. It's just that he's an elite level fighter that's supreme and better than anything that Britain's got at the moment. It's not to do with styles. In the same way that imagine I was to line up the top 10 heavyweights of Mexican origin and put them in against Tyson Fury. Well, Andy Ruiz might have a chance, maybe Richard Torres, who's a really hot prospect, but after that Fury's going to run through everybody. That wouldn't be some sort of a sign to say, look, British boxing is superior to Mexican boxing, or British boxing's all wrong for Mexican boxing. So where you have your outliers, you almost have to cut that out when you're looking for patterns. But from a technical and tactical boxing perspective, what is it that leads to seemingly unheralded Mexicans doing so well against British fighters that goes beyond just the statistical? Well, you can look at what McGREGOR was doing today against Robles, and you'll see that that's actually quite a consistent pattern. He got inside the pocket and he dipped quite low and he was trying to cover up, and he was looking to land good, powerful, individual quality shots, but then staying in the pocket. And when he was seeking to add defense, and at points he was quite irresponsible with his defense, but in the third round, for instance, the fourth round, he was very good with his defense. He was ducking undershots. He'd stay in the pocket, lean his weight onto that front foot, land a shot or two, and then start changing the height dynamic. And because Robles typically was throwing these wide hooks, he was coming under them. But Robles started to see that and started to add some straighter shots in there. And he also started to whip shots, the hooks down to the body instead of the head. So now if you duck down, it could potentially land on your head. If you don't duck down, he's going to land into your body. So what is Robles doing? What a Mexican will typically do. He will chop down at that tree, literally like an axe. Bang to the ribs, bang to the ribs. He's working you because he thinks you're going to slow down. That is the point. It's an investment for later in the fight. Whereas by McGregor fighting that type of fight and staying in the pocket, you are fighting the style that the Mexican has been grown up to fight. He's in the furnace learning that style, and you're fighting his fight. For the tennis fans out there, it's like when I'm playing a Spanish player and choosing to play him on clay. That's where they specialize. You want to get him on grass. You don't want to get him on clay. So that's the point here, that McGregor was fighting an incorrect type of fight. What you want to do is change that height dynamic, but also switch the angles. Imagine there's a semicircle around him. Think of somebody like Roman Gonzalez, because he's a guy that likes to put his weight onto that front foot too, and he too will dip and come underneath shots, but he's also shifting side to side, changing the angle on you. He's moving the feet. When he's putting his shots together, the volume is high. Now everything's loaded up. From wherever his hand will be, he'll shoot straight from there. And every shot sets up the new angle for the next shot. He's not just covering up, taking shots and then letting go of something. And then covering up, taking shots and then letting go on something. You go, I go. That's the worst approach you can take with a Mexican. And in addition to that, you want to be able to keep it long and get out of the pocket completely. You want to switch that up. You don't want to stay in the pocket against the Mexican. Now, when it came to Josh Warrington, for instance, against Mauricio Lara, what happened there? He's on the outside. He jumps in, starts throwing loads of punches, combinations, and he's standing in the pocket. You might have faster hands than Mauricio Lara. You might get off 2, 3, 4 shots. He'll only get off 2. But he's taking his hands off the floor and he's loading everything into it. And this is what he's been training to do. Sure, Josh, you land your 3, 4. My 2 are going to be destructive, though. You know the phrase, a raiding style? A fighter who's on the outside and he jumps in and he raids. And then he gets out. Well, let's use the analogy then of raiding. Imagine you have yourself an army and the enemy combatants have taken over this country estate, this massive mansion, and they're hiding in there and you are outgunned. So you need to engage in guerrilla warfare. What does raiding mean? It means you're going to run down there when they're not expecting it, burst your way into that mansion, you're going to start firing away, and you are then going to grab everything you need to grab, whatever it is you need to steal, ammunition, food, resources, whatever it is, and you get back into the woods. You don't go into the mansion, start firing away, and then all of a sudden you say, anyway, boys, we're having success here. You ask your fellow soldiers, I'm opening the fridge. What is it? You know, an omelette? Do you want an omelette? Anyone else for an omelette? Pancakes? Okay, I'll make you some pancakes, and you sit down, you watch a movie, have yourself a cup of coffee, and then wait for them to regroup to come back and get at you. You get in, you get out. You don't get in and stay in. And that's what Josh Warrington was doing. Whereas when Lee Wood fought Mauricio Lara, in the first fight, he was looking comfortable. Then he got greedy and he started trying to hook with Lara, which is the equivalent of staying too long after you've raided. In the second fight, he didn't even raid. It was the equivalent of there being a sniper. They're shooting from the woodland. He kept it long. He's not allowing this guy to even be able to get close to him. I'm not going to take risks. I'm going to bust you up from a mile away. And when your combatants try to run out of that mansion to storm towards the woods, I'm going to be picking you off with my snipers. That is the point. Taylor, Ramirez and Vasquez he beat. Sonny Edwards, how does he fight? Maxie Hughes, how does he fight? Anthony Joshua in the second fight against Andy Ruiz, how did he fight? In the first fight, he had success early. He got greedy. He started hooking with Ruiz. What happened in the second fight? He kept it on the back foot. He boxed him from range. He took that pocket away. Amir Khan against Molina, Diaz, Barrera. Amir Khan was in and out, in and out, in and out. Very fast. Kell Brook against Robles. Brilliant distance control. Lee Selby, a mover. Carl Frampton was a boxer puncher. He understood distance. Now, Leo Santa Cruz actually adapted in that rematch, and he was the one that put the distance on Frampton. But that was just Leo's ability to adapt. We're talking about typical patterns against Mexicans or Mexican-American fighters. And the reason I'm also talking about Mexican-American fighters, by the way, in case some of you point that out, the way multicultural communities like the United States would work is that traditionally speaking, when the world was less globalized, you had communities within a country, multiculturalism, so to speak. That's literally what it says in the word, multiple cultures. And so what would happen is fighters would teach the kids in their neighborhoods the skills that they'd known. Well, those neighborhoods were often not that ethnically diverse. They were quite ethnically homogenous. So an African-American fighter would typically teach to African-American kids. An Italian-American fighter would typically teach to Italian-American kids. A Mexican-American would teach to Mexican-American kids, and so on and so forth. So we're talking here about the boxing culture, remember? The philosophy, how it starts, and from there, how it's then taught and passed on. And in today's more globalized world, you've got the likes of, say, Ismael Salas, a Cuban top trainer, training Joe Joyce. You had Abel Sanchez training Gennady Golovkin. Things have moved around. Ryan Garcia is now with Derek James. But traditionally speaking, we're talking about the philosophy, the boxing culture. If British fighters want to achieve what these guys that I've given you an example of achieved, they have to be able to not fight the Mexican fighters fight. Do not give him the pocket. You saw in a recent fight between Michael Conlan and Luis Alberto Lopez. And Conlan is Irish, of course. He's not British. But he made that same sort of mistake. This is a boxer, a mover. And what did he do? He decided to come in against Lopez, hold the pocket, and start exchanging with him. How is that logical? By the same token, if you're going to go and fight a Cuban fighter, you're not going to go and stand off him and say, yeah, let me have a little technical boxing match with you and pick a shot here and there and change the angle on you. You're going to get schooled. You've got to put pressure on him, get close, bust that body, put him in a position where he's not used to fighting that way, and wear him down and break him down. That's my humble take on it. There are some fantastic trainers out there, don't get me wrong. Lee McGregor's got a brilliant training team behind him. So who am I to be lecturing at the end of the day? I'm just sitting here saying how I see it. And when I look at that pattern of when Brits have had success against the Mexicans, they would either be able to take the pocket away completely, like Lee would against Mauricio Lara in the second fight, be in and out of the pocket, like Amir Khan, or mix it up where they can choose to stand and fight or get on the back foot, the likes of Josh Taylor, for instance. You've got to have the ability, in other words, to dictate when the fight operates in the pocket. You look at somebody like Floyd Mayweather, he had a brilliant ability to maintain range. If you came up close to him, he would have the ability to deflect shots, land his own pot shot counter, then get out. He's not just staying there the whole fight. And when he's at range, he will punish you to the body. Long, sharp jabs and right hands to the body. He wants to slow you down. He wants to make you second guess whether he's going to hold his feet or step back, so that you can't just have that forward momentum with thinking, I'm not going to be punished here. You understand? You had to earn your way into the pocket, and that meant punishment. So that's what British fighters need to start to think about. How to slow down the onslaught by pumping that body and not giving him the pocket to be able to enter that pocket and work there. What McGregor did today was willingly give up the pocket, not really move inside the pocket, and just start exchanging. Recipe for disaster, typically speaking, against the Mexican fighter. So let me know what you think, ladies and gents, and where do these guys go from here? Where does Lee McGregor go from here? How can ERIK Robles do in this division? Do you think he's going to step on and go on forward? Do you think that maybe McGregor can get himself a rematch here? How do you see this all playing out? Thanks for watching, everyone. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless.